We're ready to go. Well, as this title slide here is showing, we'll be going over kind of the end of King Ahaz today. We were on him last week. We'll be talking a little bit more about Hoshea, who's the last king in Israel, the northern kingdom. We're pretty much knocking on the door of captivity. And then we introduce one of the best kings ever in the Israel, specifically in Judah, as far as separating northern and southern kingdoms, but we'll get into Hezekiah. We'll actually be discussing a lot of Hezekiah for the next probably 4 lessons. And just keep in your mind this transition of where we were talking about Uzziah and Jotham and a lot of good in their kingdoms and stuff, and then just this absolute turn where Ahaz is the most evil king ever in the southern kingdom. And then following that up with King Hezekiah being one of the best kings ever. So that's kind of our format this morning. Won't spend much time on this. You probably can't read it anyway. But just a little bit of a reminder as we're going through. If you see that little orange on the bottom of the right side there, that's depicting that we're knocking on the door of the fall of Samaria. And Hoshea is the last king up there, so we're getting into him today. And on the left side of the screen, as I just discuss, we're going to be end of Ahaz, getting into King Hezekiah. And just a reminder, and we're going to make this point a little bit later, a little bit of reminder that these prophets that we've been talking about, who've been warning over and over and over for decades and decades, that if you don't turn this around, it's coming. And then the language got even stronger. It's coming, but if you'll turn to God, there'll be a remnant and all of that right there. But Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, all these prophets we've been discussing, it looks like we're going to get to a king today that understands what they were saying and understands the need to be seeking after God. So kind of hold that in the back of your thoughts. So let's do a little bit of review, not much, but just kind of setting up where we're going today. In times of trouble, these kings were seeking after who? When we talk about the names that I just threw out in Judah and in Israel, who were they seeking after? Well, who did Israel turn to? Yeah, they tried to do this coalition, right? They tried to have this coalition to go against Assyria and stuff, so they looked after other leaders. And the prophets have been talking with them too, seek after God. But who did they seek after? Specifically, Syria and Judah for the northern kingdom. Well, what opportunity, you remember studying in Isaiah recently, what opportunity was given to Ahaz to help him? Who was he told to align with? Softball. God, right? So, I mean, that was the message of Isaiah that you all studied with Rob, and also when Johnny was teaching those classes for that week over the book of Isaiah. Ahaz said, align yourself with God and he'll be after you, because if you don't, you're going to get into trouble. So where did Ahaz turn? Assyria. So he goes after the powerhouse in the region, and if I align with him, all's going to be good. Well, that's not going to sit well with God, which is what we've been talking about the whole time. God, these worldly solutions to spiritual problems are never going to work out. And that's a lesson for us today. When we don't seek after God and we think we can figure it all out on our own, or we're just going to do it our own way, especially when it doesn't align with God, we're going to get ourselves into trouble very rapidly. And it's exactly why these kingdoms are coming to an end. So who should they have turned to, and who should we turn to? God. I mean, that's our lesson that we can carry out of this study in the Old Testament here. What applies to us, we need to be turning to God in times of trouble. Also, a little bit of review. I know you can't see this map in detail, but if you can see any color at all, for those of you that can see that, it's just kind of showing when Assyria came in back to back years and what different areas. We read a lot of passages recently that talked about them already taking captive some on the east side of the Jordan. We talked about them taking a lot of land in the northern part of Israel. area of Galilee, all these different cities. We've already talked about that. And they also had a campaign where they had gone all the way down towards Egypt. So Assyria is the powerhouse at this time in the region. It's said in 2 Kings 15:29, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Genoa, Kedesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive. So you already had what we've been studying the last few weeks, that certain peoples have already been stripped out of the land and taken away. But there was still this time, there were still prophets talking to the people, trying to get them to stop being morally corrupt people and seeking after God. And there's going to be very few. We'll get to a little bit later today where there were a few up in that area that still decided to seek after God. But definitely it wasn't the kingdom, and it wasn't only the majority. It was very rare, just a few people. So we had studied also about a week ago that Ahaz, what we had on that one of the first slides, that he sought after this king of Assyria to help him out. And we didn't really get to the story. We brought it up just on the fringe of it last week, but go ahead and turn over to 2 Kings 16. We're going to read a few verses here that just show just even more an underlying layer of evilness that King Ahaz has, and then we'll reference a few verses from Chronicles as well. So this is following where Ahaz had asked for help from Tiglath-Pileser, and he had just killed King Rezin of Syria. So after that, it says, now King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus. And King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the design of the altar and its pattern according to all its workmanship. Then Urijah the priest built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Urijah the priest made it before King Ahaz came back from Damascus. Verse 12, and when the king came back from Damascus, the king saw the altar, and the king approached the altar and made offerings on it. So he burned his burnt offering and his grain offering, and he poured his drink offering and sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings on the altar. He also brought the bronze altar, which was before the Lord, from the front of the temple, from between the new altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the new altar. Then King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, on the great new altar, burn the morning burnt offering, the evening grain offering, the king's burnt sacrifice, and his grain offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, their grain offering and their drink offerings, and sprinkle on it all the blood of the burnt offering and all the blood of the sacrifice. And the bronze altar shall be for me to inquire by. Thus did Urijah the priest according to all that King Ahaz commanded. And King Ahaz cut off the panels of the carts and removed the lavers from them. And he took down the sea from the bronze oxen that were under it and put it on a pavement of stones. Also he removed the Sabbath pavilion which they built in the temple, and he removed the king's outer entrance from the house of the Lord on account of the king of Assyria. And then it goes on to say this is pretty much the end of his story. And you can also reference 2 Chronicles 28, 22, through 25, which adds a little bit to the story, just a little bit difference, put it all together, and you get more of a full picture here. So, speaking of 2 Chronicles 28, it says there that Ahaz becomes increasingly unfaithful to the Lord. He's already described as the most evil king ever in the southern kingdom, but he just keeps adding to the evil. He's warned, Isaiah warned him. He's getting all of this knowledge of, if you want to stop all of this bad that's going on, you need to seek after the Lord. And he just will not get rid of his idol worship and all of this that has consumed him by this point in his life. And he just keeps adding to it and going his own way. Also, same passage over there, he has in his mind, if the gods of Syria helped them beat me down, remember they didn't have success with him right off the bat, this coalition of Israel and Syria. But eventually, hundreds of thousands were wiped out and taken captive, and they were eventually sent back there. But they took a major defeat eventually because of his not leaning on God. But he has in his mind that I'm going to seek after their gods. Maybe they'll help me. And not seeing the main picture that's obvious to us today, that if he would seek after the true God, none of this would be happening. But he just keeps making things worse and worse. So we know what we've been studying the whole quarter is the cause of the downfall of both kingdoms is this refusal to seek after God, but instead to seek after when we say fake gods or false gods, we really mean that. We're talking about something man-made and carved, and they're trying to give it some sort of power because they like the visualness of it and what the other nations had. And they had the true God who would have been on their side and had shown through history that he would wipe out anybody that tried to defeat God's plans at the time. But, as you go through back and forth with different kings, a lot of them just don't get the big picture. So let's look at some of the things, pull out some of the main points from that reading from 2 Kings. So he sees this Syrian pagan altar and he just loves it. Something about the design, he thinks it's beautiful, whatever. He sends runners or messengers back down there, and before he even gets home, he had already sent to let's just call him his priest, because at this time there wasn't any much valued worship going on even in Jerusalem. But he sends these plans down to his priest, and it's made before he gets home. And then when he gets home, the first thing he wants to do is he wants to make offerings on it. Again, here's somebody putting themselves in front of God and God's methods, and he thinks he, is the one that ought to be making offerings. But even worse to that, the offerings aren't to God. They're to false gods. And he's doing this on the property of God's house. It's just sickening to think somebody can be that much. You've had almost all of these kings that it said the whole time they didn't take down the high places, but they did a lot of good, and they mostly were seeking after God. They were not perfect people and had a lot of issues. This guy is way different than that. He is putting God way out of the way and seeking after all these other gods, and then he gets as bold enough that he decides that he's going to disrupt God's plans and put his own plans in the courtyard and in the temple and that. And he just, he really is the beginning of the absolute downfall for the country. Just an awful leader. So he does say it was kind of interesting and just sad that it really looks like there's in his mind that the true God is a little g to him. He's no different than Baal or anybody else. It's just these are all parallel gods. He obviously didn't accept or didn't get much training when he was coming in, and then he got in with the wrong folks. And his whole mind is that there are these little g gods out there, and he thinks that he has the power to do whatever he wants in the temple area. So he said he's going to keep this old altar just in case he needs to inquire of Jehovah God. So again, no respect being given to God and very much disrespect being given. So this is referencing a little bit of 2 Chronicles and still in 2 Kings here, some of the main points from there. It says in 2 Chronicles 28 and verse 24 that he has the articles of the house of God moved or disassembled. He did a lot of disassembling and tearing stuff down. We'll come back to that in a second. But he also removed a lot of things or moved them around, which we just read. Of course, he moved the bronze altar, which was God's. He's moving something that God had commanded to the people to build. And he's like, I don't really like that there. I like mine. Let's move this thing over here, and I'm going to put mine here in this more primary spot. It's really unbelievable. But said it moves that to the north side of the temple area. Then it talks about cutting. Got a few pictures I'll show in a minute, just in case you're like me and you couldn't visualize some of this. It'll be an artist depiction a little bit, maybe to help us see what he had actually done here. But he cut the panels off these carts that were on. There was 5 on each side of the temple itself. On the outside, there were these 5 carts that were holding these lavers on them where they had done washing of sacrifices and stuff. But it says he cut the panels off of them, and actually removed the lavers or the basins from there. And then it talked about this larger basin called the sea that they talked about, that he took it off of. It was sitting on these 12 bronze oxen out in front of the temple. And he takes it off there and decides, you know what, I think it would look better or serve a better purpose for me if I put it on these stones. And so that's what he did there. So he's totally, instead of all this stuff that we studied all the way back from Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, where God dictated, I want it done this way, precisely, this size, this spot, all of this. He's like, I don't like that. You know, I need to have more room for the stuff I want to do. So he's taking apart God's stuff and moving it around, and he's putting in the stuff that he wants that's going to make him feeling better about it. And maybe in the back of our minds, if I don't do a good job of bringing it up later, we can think about that lesson for us today, which is changing worship, or what we want to do that makes us feel better, gives us a better emotional feeling. And so we add or take away stuff that we want. God commanded, I want it done this way. And we're like, nah, this makes me feel better. And so that's kind of what he was doing. And then sadly, he shut the doors of the house of the Lord. And I got there and green, does this keep God out of the way? Can he close God up in a box? Do you think he closed God up in a box? There's no doubt he turned his back on God and there was a total separation, but you don't contain God in a box or in a house or behind a door. You know, he obviously didn't understand. Again, I think the total disrespect is he put God on some level with these wooden idols. But then it said he also made high places in every city of Judah. So real quick, I just want to give you a few visuals and stuff. Again, this is just an artist depiction. I don't think anybody had a Polaroid back then, but this maybe give you some sort of semblance of what's going on. They had these three bronze oxen on each side holding this huge basin. From what I can tell, that was used for a lot of the washing of the priest's hands and feet and that sort of stuff. But he takes that basin down and puts it on pillars of stone. That's one thing that he did. And then you see kind of in the background on each side of the house of the Lord there, you see these 5 carts with lavers or basins on them that are on each side. That's a depiction, and you can see a little bit there of where the burnt offerings were held out there. But anyway, just an artist depiction. I did want to just give a visual here. This may not be exact, but you can see kind of these wooden panels that were on the bottom of these, what it called lavers in there, that he also, it looks like he got rid of the wood and then took all these lavers down as well. So, I mean, the bigger point to us is he just got rid of a bunch of stuff that he didn't like, regardless of what was supposed to be there or what God wanted. So he got rid of a lot of that stuff because he's a selfish person. Okay, so this is pretty much going to be the end of Ahaz right here. Are there any comments or questions regarding kind of who Ahaz was, or just something that came to your mind, or a lesson we can learn? Okay, let's move on to Hosea. We're not going to have a whole lot of verses around him right here. Johnny will pick up a little bit more of Ahaz and the captivity that's coming in the next week. But let's read 2 Kings 17, 1 through 4 real quick. Okay, it says there in verse 1, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hosea the son of Elah became the king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel who were before him. Shalmaneser didn't do a good job with that, but the king of Assyria came up against him, and Hosea became his vassal and paid tribute money. And the king of Assyria uncovered a conspiracy by Hosea. Johnny will get to this next week. For he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. And this is going to be the last straw. I mean, we really are right knocking on the door of full final captivity and the destruction of the northern kingdom. That's where we're at right now. But just a little bit about this guy. We had already talked about co-regencies and a lot of the confusions in the years, and that right there, it's hard to follow sometimes. But right here, we had already mentioned, in the last couple of weeks, that this particular case might have been where there were factions, as trouble started coming upon Israel and how bad things were getting up there. It might have been that Hoshea was ruling, part of the area right there and working on eventually taking over Samaria eventually. But you had Pekah up there ruling in Samaria, very tumultuous sort of time right there. But it looks like what came to be somewhere in there, Pekah is wiped out by Hoshea, or assassinated. We've had several assassinations up in the northern kingdom, but he reigns for 9 years. He's wicked, kind of an interesting thought that he wasn't bad as some of the kings before them, but that doesn't make him good, right? He's still all into the idol worship and the sins of Jeroboam. It's hard to even know what that really means. Maybe he was a nice guy or something, even though he was still mixed up into idol worship. But that was just kind of an interesting point that's made there. But, he does have a conspiracy and kills Pekah, who's ruling in Samaria right there. And I kind of already made that point there. But I guess it could confuse you when you're seeing that it's in his third year. So you don't have this little nice lined up, Pekah ruled to here, and Hoshea took over there, except for in Samaria. That's really what makes sense. That was how it lined up there, but it looks like there were these kind of warring factions and stuff going on in the country that kind of led, and then eventually, probably through the help of having the backing of Tiglath-Pileser and his son, it looks like they're eventually able to assassinate and get Pekah out of the way, and they set him on the throne. But he's a puppet, king that's controlled absolutely by Assyria here. He's having to pay tribute, but he makes it a few years doing that and decides, I don't like really paying this tribute and stuff, so I'm going to go get another superpower to back me up and get Assyria off my back, and that backfires against him. And pretty much that point we make all the time, God's in control. The northern kingdom was not going to have success at this point. It wasn't going to happen. All this tumult and stuff going on is because God said, you turned your back on me, and now I'm going to, now you brought me and my wrath upon you. Of course, he always leaves that room for those that want to seek him, but the country's going to go to waste. So just think about what would life be in Israel now. Captivity's on the door. You got a puppet king in there that's being controlled by a superpower that's really wanting to wipe out the whole region. And, it'd be very scary. It's unstable. You have kings being assassinated over and over and other ones coming in and stuff. It's just moral corruption. It was a very bad place to be at this time. And as I said, as we move into next week with Johnny, the northern kingdom comes to an end. All right, any comments or questions on kind of that narrative background going on with Ahaz and the southern kingdom, and then Hoshea and the kingdom of Israel? Any comments or questions on that before we move into Hezekiah? Okay, well, let's keep going. I'm going to read a little bit in 2 Kings 18, and we're going to pretty much kind of reference 2 Chronicles, a little bit of 28 and 29 and 30. We're not going to read much there. We're kind of just going to go over the main points as we get to that area. So our last sort of main reading is going to come from 2 Kings 18. But let's look at Hezekiah. I mean, a lot of us already understand his reputation from studying the Bible for many years, but he was very good. He sought after God. He was still a young man, only 25 years old. He reigns 29 years. His story is discussed. Johnny will be covering some of these in the next couple of weeks. The Isaiah 36 through 39, we won't be getting into those very much today. And 2 Kings, he's discussed from 18 all the way through chapters 21, but we'll really be reading today just the first few verses. And then in Chronicles, a little bit in 28, and then mostly just 29 and 30 today, looking at some of his reforms and stuff that he does for the Lord. And then those other chapters we'll be covering over the next 2 weeks or so. So end of Ahaz, Hezekiah's sons are taking over the rule, but after 16 years of rule, Ahaz dies, and he's buried in Jerusalem. And here's this that we get every now and then when somebody's not doing well or there's another reason, but he's not buried with the sepulchres of the kings because he's an evil guy, and you can reference 2 Chronicles 28 for that. Now, can somebody remember just a little quick review? Why did Uzziah not get buried in the sepulchres of the kings? What was it? Yeah, so he was a leper. So there has been times when kings have not been buried in the sepulchres of the kings or were buried close or whatever. But, Ahaz, again, it's very shocking, but watch this, Uzziah and Jotham, pretty good. Ahaz, total evil. And now here we get to Hezekiah, which we already know, putting the cart before the horse here. He's a good guy. It's very strange to have this back and forth in the same family. But we see that in today's society too, so I guess we can learn something from that. Let's look at a little bit of his character. Let's read 2 Kings 18, the first 8 verses. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David has done. He removed the high places and broke the sacred pillars, cut down the wooden image, and broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the children of Israel burned incense to it and called it Nehushtan. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but he kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord was with him. He prospered wherever he went, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. He subdued the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from the watchtower to fortified city. So hoping you could, hear that right there. We're not flipping over to 2 Chronicles 29:2 right now, but it said it here as much also, that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, like his father David. That's not said a whole lot of times, and that's very high praise, because David was a man after God's own heart. So since the kingdom divided, there's been none like him to this level. And so he's being compared to David right here in his love for God. Now, we know there's been some kings already. I'll get to one in just a moment, but we know there's been some good kings in the southern kingdom. But this is very high praise for him, because he loves God and gets to work. So down there in verse 4, who he went to war with when he started was, he went to war against idols. It says that he removed the high places, broke the sacred pillars down, cut down the wooden images. He's doing stuff the kings before him didn't do. They got rid of some stuff, but they, a lot of them didn't touch the high places. It's almost like a lot of them was like, let's just let people have free will to worship whoever they want and stuff. We're going to worship God and do this, but I'm not going to take all this other down. Or even if it's worshiping God and God complained about worshiping even him on these high places, they decided to keep doing it, and they didn't do that. Well, Hezekiah's got a different feeling about this. He's like, what God wants, God's going to get. That's what we're supposed to be submissive. And then it's kind of interesting that it talks about that he broke the bronze serpent down, but it looks like the people right there had started treating it as a representation of God or an idol itself. So he's like, this isn't happening. So he breaks it into pieces, because it was just a bronze thing. It was something that was used by God in there, and God doesn't want something worshipped. He wants himself to be worshipped, not some bronze serpent that was used for a different purpose years before. Sorry about the typo there in the first bullet there. That should be capital L. But he held fast to the Lord and did not depart, as verse 6 that we read, and kept the commandments of the Lord. Says that God prospered him in whatever he did down there in verses 7 and 8. He was very successful. He rebelled against Assyria. Yes, there will be a turn where Assyria comes and oppresses and comes down there. But God is with Hezekiah, and God still has a purpose that we've been talking about through the prophets. And there's going to be an end coming to the kingdom of Judah as well. So all the pressures aren't just going to go away, but God greatly prospered him, and he gave him success early on, keeping Assyria out of his way as all these things were being redone to get the people's mindset more focused on serving God instead of being in constant battle. So he has some prosperity hit with there. He does rebel against Assyria, and he does have strength that shows that God's with him, where he's able to subdue the Philistines as well. And I think we already mentioned this before, so we won't mention it for very long here. But again, just notice this and all this, the way his mindset is going, God first. Look at the stark contrast between him and Ahaz. It's just really unbelievable. So why? Why do you think? Does anybody got an idea of why do you think? How can there be this quick of a turn, this quick, just from father to son, where he's just, going, he's still a young man. Why and how? Anybody got any thoughts? Got a little hint up on the board, but you may think it's some other reason, but we've been studying. I'm sorry, go ahead.
He may have just not seen the Lord in his father and made a different choice through some other influence. Choose the Lord. But again, Veronica talks about the sins of the father and the son, not just all automatically parent. What it means to me is that because I may not be what I need to be, my children still have children, and vice versa.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Braconia. So pretty much, Mr. Braconia was just making that point that God has allowed us to have free will, and just because the dad is bad doesn't mean the son's going to be bad, and just because the dad was good doesn't mean the son's going to be good. So God gives free will. I like to think, and this is speculation, you can slam this down, but I'm leading it as speculation, but I like to think maybe through what was going on and him seeing the evil that was done, it's possible, this speculation, but maybe he heard some of the words of the prophets that Johnny and I have been leading the discussions on in the last month or so, where they were doing these warnings. Maybe he caught part of that message and could see the absolute badness going on in the area, and he was like, once I have the chance, this isn't going to be the direction of the country. Don't know that exactly, but go ahead, Johnny. Yeah, so Johnny's bringing up the point, maybe, instead of him taking on a lot of what he saw his father do, maybe he took on more of the attributes that he saw through his grandfather. And I think all those are possible. We're not really given the exact answer there, but we'll just move on from there. But very good king. So you can flip over to 2 Chronicles 29. I'm not reading much for the rest of class. We'll pretty much be kind of talking about what happened here. Make sure where I'm at right now. Got about 5 or so more minutes, 5 or 10. If you flip over to 2 Chronicles 29, we're going to have him restoring worship. Then we're going to talk about him eventually restoring the Passover. So let's go over some of the bullets from that right there, and you're welcome to skim down through this as we read. This content is pretty much taken from verses 3 through 19 on the next slide or two. So he opened the doors, talking about of the Lord's house, the temple, and he started repairs. And I think this is interesting, and this is a lesson for all of us right here. This isn't let me put off tomorrow what I could have done today sort of stuff. First year, first month, Hezekiah goes to work, and that's very impressive to me. He didn't wait and say we need to really formulate a plan. He sees absolute evil going on and that God is totally against Judah at this point. And he's doing whatever he can to do something about it. So he goes to work immediately and comes up with a plan. Goes on and he directs the priests and the Levites, sanctify yourself and sanctify the house of the Lord. We got to get this right now. This entire country is unclean. All of our people are unclean. The house of the Lord has become a house of false worship. Evil everywhere. We're putting a stop to this. We want God on our side, so we got to clean ourselves. We got to clean the house of the Lord. So you have total uncleanness there as described down in verses 4 and 5, because starting from the spiritual leaders, they were all into idol worship or doing stuff their own ways. So it had just really gotten bad as Hezekiah takes over. So no, how bad had it gotten that it says down there in verse 5 that they had to carry out rubbish and debris from the house of God? So he leaves man in charge of taking care of his temple area. And under this one king, it's like trash everywhere. And I'm sure that trash included idols and worship to other people and stuff. It just absolute nastiness, just consuming that house. You know, nobody wants to live in an unclean place. And you got this temple where the people had made a covenant with God and want to come in contact with God here, and they had pretty much destroyed it from the inside out. So it was in very bad condition. Let's read a few verses there real quick in 29, 6 through 9 of 2 Chronicles. And then we'll fly through the rest of this story about good King Hezekiah. So in verse 6, it says, he's talking, he says, "For our fathers have trespassed and done evil in the eyes of the Lord our God. They've forsaken him, have turned their faces away from the dwelling place of the Lord and turned their backs on him. They have also shut up the doors of the vestibule, put out the lamps, have not burned incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. Therefore the wrath of the Lord fell upon Judah and Jerusalem, and he has given them up to trouble, to desolation, to jeering, as you can see with your eyes. For indeed, because of this, our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons, our daughters, our wives are in captivity." And we already discussed, even if you look at the whole country, captivity has actually been going on partially the whole time. But I think he's talking about the whole country and the brethren and what's going on, including the northern kingdom right there. He's like, we're in total disarray. All of God's people, at least almost all of God's people, had turned their backs on him. But finally, we brought this up a minute ago, finally someone got it. Hezekiah heeded the words of God that had been spoken through the prophets that we've been studying, for the last month or so. All right, so a few more points here. In verse 10, he says, "It's in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord." And think about this. This covenant had not been renewed since the days of Joash, the child king that was hidden from Athaliah, taken care of by Jehoiada the priest. It's about 150 or so years before. I mean, what has happened? How does that happen? But I mean, this has been, decades and decades and decades that led to this. It went from, little tiny steps to evil to just pure destruction. And then the priest and the Levites, it's talks about down there in 16 and forward there, that the priests removed the trash from the house of the Lord. Then the Levites carried it to the brook of Kidron, which is the dump or burn site where they're getting rid of all this stuff. And that it took about 16 days to complete the work. Part of that was the sanctifying of the priest. Part of that was sanctifying all the house of the Lord and the articles. So, just making the point here at the end of that reading in verse 18 and 19, the excitement when they come to tell Hezekiah, we've done what you directed, and we've done this right here. Moving on to verse 20 and 30 real quick. This is another interesting point to me. Early the next morning in verse 20, and then it goes on to talk about Hezekiah ordering sacrifice to be offered for all Israel. He got it. It wasn't just Judah. All of God's people had turned their backs on him. All of them were guilty. Down in verse 25 and 26, it gets a little bit talking about their worship and stuff. And he had stationed the Levites as what was directed back in the old law with cymbals and string instruments and harps as commanded by the Lord. Just if I was teaching a young people's class right now, we don't have time to get in this day, and I doubt there's very many in here that need to get in this point, but why don't we have this instrumental worship today? It was saying how much God pleased in it. I'll refer you back to Ephesians 5:19. We're under a new covenant now, and God wants to be worshiped differently, and he doesn't want us to worship him through instruments, but at this time, he did. And so they were doing what they were supposed to do in all these different ways. So they sang, rejoiced, prayed, and worshiped there down through verse 30. And then in verse in the last few verses of 29, after consecration, they start doing all the sacrifices and burnt offerings and all those sort of things. And the Levites and the brethren took up the slack for the priests who couldn't keep up because a lot of them weren't clean yet to do such stuff. So all the people came together, and there's a lesson for us in there that when people need help doing God's work, we can get in there and help with them. Let's move on there. It talks about the people rejoicing. And then the last point is really talking about, we can't get very deep into this. If you haven't already read it, you can read it on your own. You should remember it. But now he implements the Passover, and he invites all of Israel. Anybody that's left in the northern kingdom at this time, he invites them to come down to Jerusalem. Let's recommit ourselves to God. Let's do this Passover. Make the quick point, the Passover is supposed to be kept in the first month. They couldn't do that because of all the uncleanliness. So God provides a way. In Numbers 9, if you remember there, God gave a way that you could have the Passover in the second month if you weren't clean. So as we go through all of this part right here, just know as you read back through there that Hezekiah was a good king. He sends the people down there. He directs all these things that God wanted done to be reenacted again. They do keep the Passover, and there's a great assembly there. They go as far as to say that after 7 days of doing this, they did it for 7 more days because they were so into serving God at this time and reenacting everything. So that's the lesson for today. We'll pick up when we have class, we have our gospel meeting this week, but when we show up next Sunday to study, Johnny will be talking about the fall of the northern kingdom and everything surrounding that. Thanks for your attention.